Hello, YouTube. I'm Andrew Does Hair. You can find my work on Instagram at Andrew Does Hair. This is my client, Silvano. What does he do? He makes music for video games, I believe. He has a really cool job. And he dresses really cool, and he's got cool hair. He's just a cool looking guy. Anyways, we're going to cut his hair today, kind of somewhat loosely, roughly based on a Zayn Malik haircut. Now, I don't want to splice in any photos of Zayn here because all the pictures I found of this particular haircut on him happen to be heavily watermarked, and I'm worried I'll get sued or something. But just Google it. It's a short, choppy, messy mullet. So what I'm going to do here first is wet down his hair, which will allow me to break it down into smaller pieces to work with. Now, the first small piece I'm going to work with is a narrow strip of hair straight down the center of his head from the front to the back. I'm going to cut this to somewhat of a round shape here with club cutting is what they would call it, or a blunt cut. And the reason I want to cut that blunt, although this is going to be a very jagged, not blunt haircut, is it'll make it a lot easier for me to see it as I'm picking up the panels along the sides of the head here. So every time I pick up hair, I can see that center section that I cut as a guide, and it's giving me an idea of how long to point cut these corners here. Now, as I'm coming in and point cutting this, I want the points to go in the direction that the hair kind of lays naturally. It'll give everything kind of a cohesive look. And as I work up toward that guide, I'm going to end up just kind of bashing straight through the guide and softening it up because I left it blunt and I don't want it to stay blunt. And so even here, I'm taking the guide itself and chopping it down. And you can see this little long piece that I missed here. There's a couple little long pieces I missed here and there. That's like signature for this look. That's kind of what gives it like that vibe. Is like, yo, you got a long hair that you missed. And, you know, some people might think that a haircut is supposed to be cut all uniform and even. But, you know, if that's not the kind of haircut I'm doing here, Grandpa. Anyways, so we want to deliberately leave a couple random long chunks and chops and pieces here and there because it gives it that like, oh, I don't care kind of look that I rolled out of bed and I had better things to worry about than my hair kind of look. Now, as I get to the back here and start to shape up this mullet, what I want to do is over direct everything from the bottom upward and then cut it all about halfway between the occipital and the nape. That's going to give me a guide to work with here. So now as I go through and take vertical sections, I can see that round shape I created at the top. I can see the guide that I put in horizontally between the occipital and the nape, and I'm just connecting the dots between the two using a point cutting technique here. So every hair on this head is going to be point cut, or I'm going to do slide cutting or punch cutting. Everything is going to be texturized. There's not going to be any blunt lines anywhere on this haircut. The closest thing you might find to a blunt line in the end is maybe like the sides where I'm going to do scissor over comb. But even then, you know, scissor over comb, at least the way I'm going to try to do it, is it's going to look somewhat rough and choppy. So as I go to scissor over comb this, I want to start with a big fat comb, and I'm going to start debulking the hair from the top down. And then once I get everything kind of shortened and roughed out, I'll go back with a thinner comb and cut a little bit closer, a little bit tidier to the head where I want to. So big comb for chopping off big hair, lots of hair, and small comb for chopping off a little bit of hair and refining, or when I need to get closer to the head. Now that I've got most of my cut done and there's only a little bit of refining left to do, we can style it. So with these messy haircuts, the thing that's going to make it look like cool, jagged, shattered, choppy, piecey messy is the blow dry. What I'm doing here is using high heat and high power. I'm wiggling the hair around a lot. I'm trying to move it as much as I can, forward, back, left, right, and just like pushing it all around. And what I'm going to do once the hair is dry but kind of fluffy is I'm going to keep it on high heat, but I'm going to go to low power and just continue doing the same thing. And what you'll see happen right about here now is the hair's getting really piecey and choppy looking. That's what the hairdryer does for you. That is literally like the reason you would use a hairdryer is not to make your hair dry, but to change the texture so that instead of looking fluffy and frizzy, it'll look all jagged and pointy like this. You just have to cook your hair for a while. Now in the back here where I plan to cut a little bit more, I'm blow drying everything with a brush, and that added tension is just going to give me a little bit more uniformity in the way that the hair lays. The reason I want that is, you know, if hair's laying not uniformly and I cut a straight line, it's not going to be a straight line. And so I want everything to be laying uniformly so I can see exactly how I'm cutting it as I'm cutting it. Once I clean up that little bit of wolf hair under the bottom there, I'm going to go in and kind of slide cut, punch cut, point cut to chop this mullet down to the length that I want. Now this haircut is all about like a very subtle, tiny little baby mullet. It's not like a big, hey, look at me, I got a mullet kind of mullet. It's like, bro, is that kind of a mullet? And so, you know, I'm making it somewhat short here, but it is technically a mullet still. And you'll see that as I'm slide cutting, I'm following, again, the natural direction that the hair wants to bend anyways. Anywhere I see it like bending right, I cut from the left to the right. Anywhere it's bending left, I cut from the right to the left because I want that movement to be very cohesive. So now that everything's been tidied up and the haircut I think is about done, I'm going to go for my product. Now, I actually probably don't even need to put any product in this hair. It already looks cool. And so when I say I put in a little bit of product, I mean there is barely anything in here. And I just want to use it to help those little like one-off individual hairs to stand way out and support themselves up and more or less just kind of make the hair look a little bit lived in and grungy. So I noogied in on the roots and that's about done. Now, before we fully soak in the beauty of this haircut, let's do a little photo shoot. Now, when I started doing these videos, I wasn't really planning on doing like photo tutorials. I don't know if I'm good enough as a photographer to be doing tutorials, but I more so wanted these to be kind of a glimpse of my process. Like, hey, I got a lot of content on Instagram. Here's how I shoot it. But in this video today, I decided it might be fun to do a little bit more of what might come off as a tutorial. I got a lot of questions from barbers and hairstylists about buying better cameras or taking better photos. And so what I want to do with this video is I want to start off with what I see as a really common picture in the salon and barbershop, which is the photo on the left here. This is shooting with an iPhone through a ring light against a wall, like a mugshot. This is like such a cliche in the hair industry, and it's just like you see it everywhere. So I'm starting with that photo, and then what I'm going to do through the duration of this video is change one factor at a time until we end up with the photo on the right here. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but they're very different. And I do want to point out that there was zero editing involved in either of these photos. This is just right out of camera. And neither one of these photos has more resolution than the other. It's the same resolution between the two cameras, zero editing. We're just going to change some factors along the way to give you an idea of what you can do to maybe get better photos in the salon or barbershop. So this is our first shot, our sort of control here, our starting point. This is our mug shot through the ring light against the wall, like, again, we see all the time in the salon. And the first thing that I want to urge you to fiddle with is your exposure. Now, if you've been pulling out your phone and just like taking a photo and never thinking about your exposure, most of the time it's going to give you a good exposure. But what you can do is you can tap on the subject. It'll give you this little sun dial here, this little slider with the sun on it. And what you need to do is slap that sun around like it owes you money. Sometimes you want to drag it down and underexpose a photo. Sometimes you want to push it up and overexpose a photo. It's not always going to be like a one-size-fits-all answer, but I really urge you to move the thing around, because what you're going to find is if you overexpose a photo, for example, with a white background and dark hair, you're going to see a lot more detail in that hair compared to even a regular exposure or underexposing. But at the same time, if you were to underexpose the same photo, you might lose detail in the hair. However, you're going to save a whole lot of detail in the lighter tones, like the skin, like the coloring, and everything is going to look so much nicer in the skin when you underexpose. And so depending on the outcome of the photo, you want underexpose or overexpose. And if you do plan to edit, typically it's like kind of a general rule that if you underexpose a photo, it saves more of the important detail that you'll need while editing later. You can edit it to bring back the hair color a lot more easily than you can save skin tones if they're too bright, or anything that's too bright. If you blow something out, if you overexpose it, it's gone forever. But if it's underexposed, you have a lot more latitude to save it while editing. So the second thing that I would want to urge you to fiddle with and play with if you want to try to take better photos before you run out and buy a new camera is distance. And when I say distance, I don't just mean between your model and your background. I also mean between you and your model. Just in every sense of the word, you want as much distance, at least just to figure out the difference here. You want all the distance you can get. And you might think, oh, if I back up and take a photo, there's going to be a whole bunch of background in there. Of course there will be. But if we zoom in here and we look at his face from this much more distant photo, we'll see that his proportions are drastically different from our first photo. He looks like a different person. On the photo to the left, his nose is a little bigger, his forehead's a little bit bigger, his jaw is a little bit smaller. And on the right, he's got this bigger, stronger, more masculine jaw. If you look at the back of his head on the left, he's got this little pinhead thing, this little peanut head going on. But on the right side, his proportions are way more pleasing and more accurate. And so this distance is super duper important. And if you ever go to like a professional photography studio, you'll see them shooting with like big long lenses standing across the room, because portraiture from far away just has a look to it that you can't get up close. And so many barbers and hairstylists that I see, they're shooting up close and then they go, hey, what kind of nicer camera can I buy to get a better photo? And I'm like, well, try backing up first. And they go, no, I just want to buy a nicer camera to fix it. But even if you have a really fancy camera up close, it doesn't fix the problems that it can come up from shooting too close. Now, that's not to say that you can't take some creative portraits from very close. That happens all the time. But if we're shooting haircuts, proportions are very, very important. And you're going to have better proportions if you back up. Now, very, very closely related to this last point is our focal length. This is the third thing that you need to consider. So if you're, depending on the phone model you have, you might have a 0.5 lens and a 1x lens, but other models have this 3x lens. What the focal length is going to do essentially is crop out all that background for you. So when you back up to get your better proportions out of your model, you can zoom in on your phone to, you use a different focal length, and now you just cropped out all the busy room. So like I said, it's very closely related to the last point. But there is a problem when it comes to shooting with phones. If you are working far enough away to really see this difference that the distance produces, you're going to have to zoom in so much on your phone that it severely degrades the image quality. Your haircut will start to look like a painting. Everything looks a little bit fake. The resolution just isn't all that great. I would say, the problem isn't necessarily resolution. It's what's called an optical zoom. So here what I'm going to do is set down my iPhone and pick up a DSLR. Let me point out, the iPhone that I'm using, it's a 13 Pro Max. It has a 12 megapixel camera. And this DSLR that I just picked up, this is a Canon 5D Classic. It came out in 2005, and it also is a 12 megapixel camera. And so the difference you're about to see is not a difference in megapixels. What it is a difference in the way that the camera zooms, or in the way that it produces the focal length. With the iPhone, when you zoom in tight enough to get these facial proportions, you're digitally zooming, and it's degrading the image quality. But with a DSLR, the zoom or the focal length happens in the lens. It's optical, meaning that the same 12 megapixels on the left is going to do a much different job than the same 12 megapixels on the right, because on the right we have an optical focal length and optical zoom, and therein lies the value of an interchangeable lens camera. It's not just about more megapixels. It's about being able to put the proper lens on there to give you the look that you want to get. And I find that when I go to grab my fancy cameras, my DSLRs, it's not about the resolution, it's about the focal length. So the fourth thing I want to cover here is shaping light. I kind of don't like ring lights at all, because the shape of the light is just not nice. You end up with too much light under the chin, too much light under the eyes, and then the light just sprays all over the room. This is such a big, complex, crazy topic, but if I'm going to try to just make it like a super simple, easy little pointer here, look up clamshell lighting, learn the job of a key light, a fill light, a rim light, and maybe like a background light or a hair light. There's like, when you learn the jobs of these different lights, the names of these lights, it makes lighting a whole lot simpler. So this little lighting setup we're doing here, this is called a clamshell setup. I have a key light up above. This is a 16-inch beauty dish with a diffuser. And then down below him, I have a reflector, which is acting as my fill light. And so this is kind of similar to what the ring light does, in that it puts light above and below. But the difference is, with the ring light, you have as much light below the head as you have above the head, and so there's no shadows anywhere. But this way, that reflector isn't going to be as bright as the light above it, so you have shadows on the face, and it shows contours. And since we're trying to emulate the kind of white wall, white backdrop thing that we started with, I put a second light on the wall here. And what that's going to do is allow this wall in the photo to remain white. So here in these two photos, you can see a pretty drastic difference that the lighting makes. I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but professional photographers worry about lighting, and new photographers worry about, lenses and bodies. With the lighting on the right, you can see contours on the face. He looks 3D. With the lighting on the left, he doesn't even have a cheekbone. It is a big, giant, difficult topic to learn, but it makes such a massive difference. If you think you need to buy a new camera, go watch some videos on lighting, buy $100 light, and fiddle around with lighting before you go buy a better camera. If you're not grasping this, no better camera will make the difference that better lighting will make. The last tip I want to give you is about the amount of light. When I say that, these lights that I set up here, they're actually strobes. They do flash. In the last photo I took, I did not have the flash going off, but here I'm about to take some photos with the flash going off. And on the left, you can see that the camera settings, ISO 800 f2, it produces a little bit of a soft, uneven image. But on the right, because I had so much light, I was able to use a lower ISO, which gives me a cleaner image off of the camera sensor, and a tighter aperture, which gives me a cleaner image out of the lens, to just get that really punchy, clean look. Now, it is worth noting that you might look at this and go, well, I like the left image better. That's perfectly fine. That is a look, and that is a stylistic choice. However, when you start looking at like magazine quality, like crazy hair photo shoots where everything is very like editorial and just crispy, punchy, the way they get that is with these camera settings that I just showed you. And the way you shoot with those camera settings is by having very, very bright light. If we were to zoom in on these two photos, you would see that the one on the left actually has a great deal of, I guess you would say, like imperfections to it, technically speaking. There's more grain in the image, there's more noise. Some of the hairs, like you just can't see the detail there because it's falling out of focus. Some of the colors don't look very even because that digital noise that is muddying it up. But on the flash photo, the coloring is beautiful. You can count pores on the face. You can see every hair on the head from the front to the back. And so if it is important to you that you want to show a lot of detail in your hair, know that no matter which camera you're using, whether it's a fancy camera or an older camera, shooting with more light will give you a cleaner image than shooting with less light, generally speaking. So now that I got everything dialed in, and we went from this kind of basic like Instagram hair photo to a much cooler looking photo. And again, none of these were edited, not even a little bit. What I did here is I changed my camera settings to shoot in black and white. That's something I've been enjoying lately. And then we kind of loosened up and I coached him around, and I just went through a few more shots here. I was trying to get some expressions out of him, and just had some fun. And this one here is my favorite of the set. Anyways, if you were into this content, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.